If worse comes to worse.
All right.
Okay. Okay.
Are we good? Okay. All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Capital Clarity. I'm Ron Nate, president of the Idaho Freedom Foundation, and this is going to be the norm for the rest of the legislative session. I almost said semester because I'm an old college professor, but for the rest of the legislative session, we'll be doing this at noon again due to popular acclaim or whatever you call it, but it's nice to be back at noon. Because of that, scheduling rooms is not always smooth. So I just want to let you know that next week we will be doing this at noon as well. However, it'll be on the other end of the garden level of the Capitol, the very end, EW 42 next week. We'll try and keep you informed on that. And sometimes we'll be here, sometimes there, but it'll be nice to have a little variety in our presentations. Well, today we have a great lineup here. I see Representative Boyles entered the room, so great. Hopefully everything went well on the House floor. It's nice to have you here. All right, what we want to do, first of all, we want to show you the premiere of an Idaho Freedom Foundation video that I was going to say highlights, but really lowlights some of the words and ideologies of the National Education Association and how that is maybe translating into Idaho a little bit. And this will play directly into what our guest speaker, Max Nelsen, has to say. So let's go. Yep.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Say the words. Sam!
In Idaho, the left keeps demanding more money for their failed teacher union-run public schools. But who's in charge of these unions? And what are their plans for our kids? Let's check in on the National Education Association and their president, Becky Pringle.
I am the great-granddaughter of people who were kidnapped from the Ghanaian region of West Africa and enslaved in Charlottesville, Virginia.
What?
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom.
2,000 years later.
Oh, freedom over me.
What do you mean by that?
I hope you heard me say the words. Diversity, equity, inclusion.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Say the words. Say the words. Sam! Sam out loud! Sam again!
To counter the efforts of groups like the NEA, IFF worked to pass S 1198, which prohibits the DEI agenda in state higher education. And IFF is working to extend those prohibitions in K-12 education.
Wrap a circle of protection around our immigrant students. They fought against using standardized testing to collect student immigration status. And they won. I will forever be proud of us and our response to the Department of Education's dangerous, diabolical, and unconstitutional edict, which was designed to erase diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Every student, every family, every community, I need you to stand up, NEA. Look around and see our power. NEA, remember who you are and hold your head high. You are brave. You are powerful. You are the NEA. Hold your head high. Hold your head high. NEA. Oh, freedom.
We must defeat the evil and angry NEA and their DEI and woke agendas in our schools. And the IFF is getting it done. To help us win the fight, go to idahofreedom.org.
Thanks. You'll be able to access that on social media and in your emails after this meeting. I am pleased to introduce our speaker today, Max Nelsen. He is the Director of Research and Government Affairs at the Freedom Foundation. Just to be clear on this, we are the Idaho Freedom Foundation. Washington has an ally organization that we're often aligned on policies called the Freedom Foundation, and that is Max Nelsen's organization. As the Freedom Foundation's Director of Research and Government Affairs, Max leads the team working to advance the Freedom Foundation's mission through strategic research, public policy advocacy, and labor relations. Max regularly testifies on labor issues before legislative bodies, including our own, and his research has formed the basis of several briefs submitted to the U.S. Supreme Court. Max's work has been featured in a variety of media outlets, including the Wall Street Journal, Fox News, Forbes, The Hill, National Review, and the New York Times. Probably not in a good light on that last one, but that's okay. From 2019 to 2021, Max served as the presidential appointee to the Federal Service Impasses Panel with the Federal Labor Relations Authority, which resolves contract negotiation disputes between federal agencies and labor unions. He is here to talk about some labor unions today. Prior to joining the Freedom Foundation in 2013, Max worked for the Washington Policy Center and interned with the Heritage Foundation. Max holds a labor relations certificate from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and graduated magna cum laude from Whitworth University with a bachelor's degree in political science. Please welcome Max Nelsen.
Well, thanks, Ron, for the introduction, and to the Idaho Freedom Foundation team for the opportunity to share a little bit today about an issue that I'm very excited about, very passionate about, and that I hope over the course of the next 20, 30 minutes or so, we'll all share a similar excitement and passion for. Maybe we can even be as excited as Becky Pringle was here a few minutes ago, but that's maybe a high bar to shoot for. I hope not. Somebody says that. Fair enough. Fair enough. As Ron mentioned, you know, in my capacity at the other Freedom Foundation, as I refer to it when I'm here in Idaho, we work primarily on public sector labor union reform. We believe, as an organization with roots on the West Coast, through long, hard-fought experience, that there is no bigger, more important player in the institutional progressive left than public sector labor unions. And this, for us, is a strategic issue. I recognize people on the right may not be as passionate, perhaps, about reforming teachers' unions as they are about maintaining their Second Amendment rights or fighting for the right to life. And these are all important issues. But if I want to leave you with one impression today, it's that if you care about any of these things, accountable government, low taxes, a good business climate, social issues, protecting kids, all of those goals will be better advanced and better achieved and better defended if we are able to make progress in right-sizing the influence that public sector unions have over our political process and over our policy-making process. I'll start big, and then we'll zero down. We'll go small. We'll zero down here to the state of Idaho. But just a little background on the labor movement in America today. I think most people, when they think of unions, here we go. Most people, when they think of unions, they probably think of hard hats, auto workers, factory floor, and that would have been a correct assessment of the labor movement 100 years ago. But today, things have changed dramatically. Today, the heart and soul of the labor movement in America is public sector employees, government employees, and public sector unions. You can see on the chart behind me the membership rates this is the raw number of union members in each sector, government and the private sector. And you can see as private sector union membership has consistently declined, it's about 6% today, public sector union membership has increased and taken up the slack to the point that they're effectively at the same level today. So whereas you've got about 6% of the private sector is represented by a union, in the government it's about a third, about 33%. And in some states, it's much higher than that. So why even bother making the distinction between government unions and private sector unions? Well, it's very important for several reasons. If we can go to the next slide here, should be a quote from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that labor advocate known as a progressive champion for the working man. Well, FDR realized 100 years ago that there are structural differences, important structural differences between unions and collective bargaining in private industry and unions and collective bargaining in government. And FDR zeroed in on two concerns that I think are perfectly relevant still today. His concern about government sector collective bargaining was that, one, it short-circuited the democratic process. We manage government in our American system through our elected officials, through our elected representatives. They are entrusted with the responsibility and the obligation to make decisions about how government is going to run, what taxes are going to be, how much public employees are going to be paid, and so on. And FDR recognized, hey, when we require public employers, public agencies, to sit down and negotiate over all of these things with a private labor organization, that's essentially outsourcing the elected officials' obligations and responsibilities to an unelected private entity. And that's just fundamentally at odds with our system of representative government. His second concern, being a big government progressive, was that he didn't like the idea that public employees could go on strike and essentially withhold government services hostage to their own private demands. And that made it, maybe that was coming from a big government progressive place from FDR's standpoint, but it's a perfectly valid concern. Government does the things that we have determined through our elected officials and the political process are so important that government needs to have a monopoly on them, or government needs to be able to tax people to pay for them. These are critical things by definition. And so the idea that a private organization can shut down the government by withholding its labor and essentially hold the rest of society hostage was something that FDR himself was very concerned about. I think is it the next slide here, slide number 4. To put it a little more coarsely, the head of the Chicago Federation of Teachers, the Chicago Teachers Union, noted just last year that this truth is still relevant. When we shut down schools, this whole goddamn city is at a standstill. And you know what? She's right. She's absolutely right. And that's a lot of power for a private interest group to have. The other key distinctions that I would point out between private sector unions and public are that in the government, you can't put the employer out of business. There's always, the government is always going to be here. Public schools are going to exist. State agencies are going to exist. There is no marketplace competition. There's no failure. There's no profit motive. So whereas in private industry, the union has to, the demands at the bargaining table are constrained by market competition and profit motives. In government, that's not the case. In government, you can always raise taxes, or you can cannibalize other government services to pay for union demands. That's a fundamental difference. And the last one that I would highlight is also structural and important. In private industry, if the union sits down at the bargaining table with the boss, the factory owner, that person, that factory owner, that management team has its own interests, and it sends its own people to the bargaining table. And it doesn't really, it's going into those negotiations with the standpoint of making sure the employer's interests are represented. And the union is going into those negotiations with its interests and the employee's interests. And there's an adversarial relationship there, and they work through it. In government, the public officials who are at the bargaining table are either elected officials themselves or are appointed or hired by elected officials. And so unions realized long ago that in the public world, in government, unions can elect their own boss. If you can dominate the school board race and as a teachers union, then you're going to be bargaining with your people, maybe even your own members, if it's a teacher or a union activist who got elected to school board. And so at that point, you have unions have an outsized interest and an ability in dominating elections at the school board level, the city council level, here at the state legislature, certainly, and all the way up to the presidency, because they know these are the people that they're going to be negotiating with and that are going to be making the decisions about public employee compensation and union policy. So it's important to recognize those structural differences. And it's also important to recognize that the financial interest, just the organizational interest of public sector unions is always going to be one that favors bigger government, more expensive government, a government that employs more people, because that translates into more union members or potential union members paying higher rates in union dues. That is always structurally the interest of public sector unions. So let's take it down one more level. The biggest public sector union is the National Education Association. It's actually the biggest union in America today. It has 2.5 million members. It generates hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue just at the national Washington, D.C. headquarters level at the NEA. The NEA nationally at DC then has a network of state and local affiliates around the country as well that are all generating their own revenue. So this is probably easily $1 billion plus network of entities. If we go to slide 5, oh, there we go. You're one step ahead of me. Look at you guys. The Wall Street Journal editorial board encapsulates this just so well. They noted that the NEA is, quote, the ideological and institutional vanguard of progressive politics, a powerful wing of the Democratic Party, and intent on, quote, invading public schools with progressive politics. That's a really good summary. But as always, things hit a little harder when you look at the details. The generality is good to have, but let's zero in on some of the details. Well, the NEA's DC headquarters alone spent more than $167 million in members' dues on politics, lobbying, and campaign contributions in the 2023 to 2024 academic year alone, almost exclusively going to left of center candidates, causes, ballot measures, and so on. And that doesn't count the $4 million in additional funds it raised and spent through just its federal political committee. Now, I think it's important, sometimes this gets lost in the discussion about teachers' unions. They are not just part of the left's political infrastructure. And they are not just backing Democratic talking points and whatever the policy priorities of the day happen to be. They are setting the agenda for the left. I think that's important to realize. Case in point, long before it became popular on the left in 2020, the NEA's DC office was advocating for defunding the police, opposing voter ID, claiming that only white people can be racist, backing abortion on demand, supporting restrictions on Second Amendment rights, and even calling for the removal of statues of historically problematic figures. That goes back easily to 2015 and some of the policy and advocacy that the NEA was engaged in. And then lo and behold, 5 years later, this is what everybody on the left is talking about. If we can bump up to the next slide, this is NEA President Becky Pringle, who we heard from earlier today, just driving the point home. At a protest in 2023 targeting Governor Ron DeSantis, she proclaimed, "Our students do not need protection from drag queens." It's a pretty good summation of the union's worldview. At the NEA's most recent annual representative assembly conducted in Portland, which sends a message all on its own, the union adopted a series of resolutions, very controversial, including everything from attacking President Trump as a fascist to undermining the enforcement of immigration laws and cutting ties with the Anti-Defamation League over its Jewish ties and mission. Some of the documents that were distributed by the union to attendees of this conference included a pronoun guide claiming that people who do not automatically introduce themselves with their pronouns are, quote, unsafe. They also distributed a land acknowledgement guide directing anyone opening an event to fight colonization by reminding attendees of the dispossession of indigenous land and people. The 9-page report that the NEA distributed to its convention attendees listed the union's priorities and achievements for the first half of 2025. Among other things, the union boasted about taking the lead in filing lawsuits against the Trump administration, fighting efforts to defund DEI in public schools, engaging in strikes that shut down schools, supporting the No Kings rallies, backing World Pride and LGBTQ plus Pride Month, organizing opposition to immigration enforcement, and working to, quote, flip the U.S. House of Representatives Democrats in 2026. That's the NEA. Let's drop it down one more level and talk about the Idaho Education Association. I mentioned the NEA has its network of affiliates around the country. Here in Idaho, the statewide affiliate, it's the IEA, and in any school district that has been where the teachers have been unionized, there is a local NEA affiliate. So when a teacher joins the union, they are paying dues to the local affiliate, the state affiliate, the IEA, and the NEA in DC. Now, the IEA tries to come across as less progressive as its parent affiliate, but that falls apart pretty easily with even the slightest examination. If we can jump to slide 7. Let's see. That is the IEA delegation to the conference in 2023, at which NEA President Becky Pringle was attacking Ron DeSantis and defending drag queens in public schools. That's in the center there is the president of the IEA, Lane McAnally, with the rest of the IEA contingent. If they disagree with the NEA's agenda, they sure don't look like they have too many qualms about it here. Who has heard of the Idaho Progressive Investor Network? Anyone in the room? Okay, I'm not surprised. It is an LLC. It's not a nonprofit, has no website, maintains very little public-facing presence, but it is a company, private business that was formed by Boise Mayor Lauren McLean several years ago to be a clearinghouse, if you will, for progressive donors and political groups to coordinate how they're going to fund and what they're going to fund in terms of politics and ideological projects here in Idaho. Well, our analysis of the teachers unions, the IEA's tax returns, shows that the IEA is a member, an annual member of the Progressive Investor Network, and contributes $25,000 per year in its members' dues to support the activism and advocacy of this organization. The Summer Institute is a program run by the IEA. It's a professional development seminar that runs for several days during the summer for teachers to go and get their continuing education requirements and maintain their teaching certification in Idaho. That's another great example of where the IEA's priorities lie. The 2024 Summer Institute featured a keynote presentation by a Democratic elected official. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with that, but the content of the keynote included this official criticizing Republican legislators and elected officials in Idaho by name, criticizing Idaho's pro-life laws, for example. Another session at the Summer Institute was entitled "Creating Safe Spaces for LGBTQ+ Students, Staff, and Families." There was another session hosted by the union official who serves as a government relations officer for the Boise Education Association. She has previously compared conservatives and elected officials to the Taliban. Classes as part of the NEA's Leaders for a Just Society program were included in the IEA's Summer Institute. The NEA describes this program as training teachers to become activists dedicated to countering attempts to whitewash and rewrite the nation's history and eliminate the contributions and lived experiences of Indigenous, Black, and other communities of color, and combating the maligning and marginalization of LGBTQ+ students and educators. This program, the NEA boasts as part of its decision to put racial and social justice at the forefront of its work. And according to an NEA article from December 2023, this is several years ago now, there were at least 30 educators who were incorporating this curriculum into learning experiences in Idaho. Let's take another step down. That gives you the worldview. That's the ideological worldview. Let's take a look at how the IEA engages in the political process here in Idaho. If you go to the next slide, the co-chair of the IEA's government relations team claims that the IEA is nonpartisan, but admits that, or claims that the teachers' work from bell to bell is political. This goes back to the point I was making earlier. The unions realize that the operation of government, where their members work, is determined by elected officials, and hence they want to engage heavily in the political process. Well, the IEA at least admits they're political, but is it really nonpartisan? Let's take a look at that. Let's jump to the next slide, 10. Starting with the IEA's endorsements. In the 2024 general election, the IEA endorsed 49 candidates for state legislature. 34 of them were Democrats, 14 were Republicans, 1 was an independent. Now for Idaho, that's still pretty lopsided, but at least they can say, hey, we endorsed 14 Republicans. We're not partisan. Okay, well, let's take a closer look at those 14 endorsements. Of the 14 IEA endorsed Republicans, 4 had no general election opponent. There was no Democrat running. and 9 prevailed over their Democratic opponent by an average of 44 percentage points. In other words, the IEA will endorse a Republican if there is no chance that a Democrat is going to be occupying that seat. It costs them nothing to make that endorsement and allows them to generate the appearance of bipartisanship. In the 14 competitive legislative elections decided by less than 20 points, the IEA endorsed the Democrat in 12 of those 14 and made a dual endorsement of both the Republican and Democratic candidates in a 13th. That's a much better indication of where their political priorities lie. The IEA also supported Proposition 1, which was widely opposed on the right and rejected at the polls by Idaho voters. I think I might have missed. Oh, yes, that's right. I got to mention that as well. So let's see. Are we on to? Let's go to the next slide here. The IEA does maintain a political action committee called PACE. Between that and the NEA nationally in DC, the union spent $124,000 in contributions in 2024 through a web of political action committees. But we've crunched the numbers to see where that money went, and it uncovers that the IEA has essentially a two-step political strategy: a primary election strategy and a general election strategy. So starting with the primary, in the GOP primary elections in May 2024, the IEA-aligned PAC spent 61% of its expenditures essentially in 2 races. That's all that it really cared about. One was opposing, by far the biggest, was opposing Representative Wendy Horman out in the Idaho Falls area, prominent school choice advocate and supporter. And then the other priority was backing a challenger to Senator Scott Herndon up in North Idaho, who at the time was chair of the Idaho Freedom Caucus. Well, Wendy Horman prevailed and continued to serve in the legislature, but Senator Herndon was replaced by a more moderate union-backed candidate. You can see everything else on the chart there. That's Wendy Horman's race at the top in the red bar, money spent against her. And then at the bottom, the smaller green bar is money spent supporting the opponent to Senator Herndon. Everything else is essentially negligible in terms of their spending in the primary. Let's jump to the next slide, look at the general election. So I guess just to recap, the strategy in the primary is go after prominent union opponents in the Republican primary and try to get them replaced by more moderate union-aligned Republicans. That was their strategy in the past. Once they shift to the general election, the 93% of IEA-connected PAC spending supported Democratic candidates in the general. So we want the Republicans to be as moderate as possible, and in the general, we want to replace as many Republicans with Democrats as we can. That's the strategy. And that is exactly how you would expect a progressive organization to behave in a generally conservative state like Idaho. The IEA, after the end of last legislative session, was, shall we say, very upset. If we'll go to slide 13, Lane McAnally, the IEA president, described the 2025 legislature as without a doubt the worst legislative session for public education in recent memory, if not the history of our state. In articles published on the union's website since last April, the IEA has described the 25th session as, quote, dismal and devastating. It has specifically denounced conservative lawmakers as, quote, bad, destructive, radical, hardline, out of control, and power hungry, while assailing the legislation they supported as ranging from frivolous to punishing. So what is the IEA going to do about it? They launched what they call the May Matters campaign, which they describe as an effort to, quote, expel the, quote, infestation of radical lawmakers in Boise with a campaign to replace conservative Republicans with more moderate or liberal Republicans in the May 2025 GOP primary elections. And the IEA makes some compelling points. They recognize turnout is lower in the primary. If they can motivate their supporters and their base to turn out early and vote for union-backed or union-recruited candidates running as Republicans, that's probably their best shot at ensuring a favorable majority for their position going forward, as opposed to trying to elect Democrats in the general election where it's much more difficult. Part of the union strategy involves communicating with their members and trying to get Democrat and independent teachers to make some, quote, pragmatic political calculations and re-register as Republicans so they can vote for the most liberal candidates running in the GOP primaries. We've already seen examples of this underway in the Twin Falls School District, where early at the beginning of the year, the district called an all-staff meeting for teachers where the district school board chair came in and made essentially this exact pitch. Public education is under attack. We need you to register as Republicans if you care about public education, and we need you to vote in the May primaries. And some investigation work that we did after that news broke revealed that the teachers union was behind the scenes coordinating with the district to call that meeting. And then right after the district presentation, the union was contacting teachers in the district to say, you know, great, this was such an important message from the superintendent or from the board chair, and we want to plug you into the IEA's political campaign, get you involved in our phone banking efforts and so on. So this is underway right now as we speak. So I say all of that not to criticize the IEA or the NEA for being liberal. I'm of the belief if you want to form a membership organization in America and engage in politics, more power to you. You have every right to do that. And if I disagree with your politics, so be it. We'll hash it out on the battlefield of ideas and go at it through the usual process. So if the NEA's only fault and the IEA's only fault was that they disagreed with me politically, that's not a policy debate necessarily. Where we're concerned as Freedom Foundation is the fact that state law in Idaho allows taxpayer funds and resources, school district funds and resources to be used by the teachers union to increase their membership, to increase their political clout, to increase their ability to lobby the legislature and pursue these political goals that I disagree with. Now, we would not allow, say, the National Rifle Association to come in on paid time into public schools and recruit teachers to join. We would not allow school district payroll systems to be used to deduct NRA political victory fund contributions from teachers' paychecks. We would not be handing over to the NRA teachers' home addresses and contact information, or state employees' home addresses or contact information, so that the NRA can go out and recruit members. But all of this and more happens in the context of public school districts using their facilities, resources, and funds to support the teachers' unions. About 83 of Idaho school districts out of 116 currently negotiate with the teachers' union. And a priority for these union negotiations is to get the district to make these kind of concessions, to get the district to deduct union dues from teachers' paychecks, to give teachers special paid time off. I think that'd be the next slide, to engage in union advocacy while continuing to receive their full taxpayer-funded salary and benefits. That's a practice that we estimate amounts to about $500,000 per year in time that teachers are spending outside the classroom doing union work. That's enough to hire about 6 full-time educators in Idaho, but they're engaging in union work at taxpayer expense instead. Some of these union contracts even specifically state that this union paid time off can be used to engage in lobbying the legislature. A new report we just put out that earlier in this week looked at a practice underway in the Boise School District, and apparently at a lesser extent in the Twin Falls School District as well, in which the school district will pay a special stipend to educators that is marketed as essentially the district covering the cost of teachers' union dues. And it allows the educated teachers or union activists to go into the schools in Boise and Twin Falls and pitch membership as though it's free. That's those programs in those 2 districts, we estimate, according to our public records request, cost about $1.2 million a year just in those 2 districts alone, to create an incentive, to create this special side compensation that the union can then turn around and use as a marketing tool to increase its membership. So that's the problem. There is a solution. The legislature can act. The legislature can tamp down on all of these practices and prohibit school district funds and facilities from going to support a teachers union. There have been some fantastic champions for this issue in the legislature in recent years. Representative Judy Boyle and Senator Ben Taves have been taking point on this. We've been happy to support and work alongside them and applaud their efforts. Unfortunately, the legislation has not passed yet, but it's a new year. We're cautiously optimistic. There's a print hearing even later this afternoon, so I don't want to steal any more of Representative Boyle's thunder, but happy to stick around and answer questions after the fact. But as I said at the beginning, if there's one thing to take away from this discussion, It's the importance of this issue strategically to everything else that conservatives care about. Even if this isn't your cup of tea, this is something that you should be watching closely. So my encouragement to you would be follow this legislation, talk to your elected officials about it, even if they're on the same team, even if you know they're probably going to agree with you on this, just give them that extra encouragement to help them realize this is something we care about as conservatives, that the grassroots cares about, that they should be paying attention to and be a champion on this year. This is the year to get it done. So I'm thrilled again to be here with you all. Happy to answer questions if there are any, but also happy to pass it off to Representative Boyle to talk about her bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. And we'll ask that he hangs around to answer questions at the end of the presentations. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Representative Judy Boyle. She is a champion for free and fair education, and she has some legislation for this session she wants to talk about. Thank you.
Okay, so this thing is like you stand over there or you stand down here. So I'll try it down here. First, thank you all for inviting me here. This is a really important thing, I think. I was always taught that you went to school to learn how to read and write and do math and science and history and the Constitution, but I guess not. We're there instead for the pleasure of the teachers union. So think of all that taxpayer money that is being spent on unions instead of being spent in the classroom. We're always being told we're not spending enough money in the classroom. So if they really cared about that, maybe they can do their union activities somewhere else. Is this not working? Oh, it's this one, not that one. Oh, got it. So this bill has been tried. This is now the third year. The first year, it was Representative Sage Dixon, and it lost in the House by just a very few votes. So last year, I said, sure, I'd love to take this on. The teachers union hate me anyway, so it doesn't make much difference. Anyway, we passed it overwhelmingly in the House, and then it went to the Senate where it never was allowed to even have a hearing. So we're trying it again this year, which is why it's really important that we hear from people. I mean, my colleagues need to hear from their constituents on how they feel about this. When we look at the test scores of our students, they are appalling. And it's across the nation. You know, we quit teaching kids cursive writing years ago. And we know cursive writing helps their brain to develop. So I'd like to get back to the old days when teachers actually taught things instead of worrying about their union activities. So this bill that we're introducing at 1:30 in the House Commerce Committee will have all of these things that Max talked about. So it will stop them from using taxpayer money for their various activities. And it will not allow them to take teachers' personal information and give it to the unions without that person's approval and permission. I think that is just appalling. So if you're interested, you know, come down to the committee or just tune in. So this is a meeting that's just an introduction, which means the public doesn't get to debate there. They don't get to offer their opinion. If it has a print, well, we used to call it print hearings. Now they're called introduction hearings. So if the committee votes to introduce this bill, then it will have a real public hearing probably next week sometime. And that's when the public can come and testify. You always can send an email to the committee. You can do this online, in person, however you want to testify, but it's important you talk to your own legislators and let them know how you feel about this issue. So I would stop for now, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. And we will invite you to come up and ask questions. We have a microphone in the center aisle here, so please speak into the mic. That way it gets broadcast and gets on recording as well, and so everyone can hear your question. And so thank you, Max and Representative, for being available for questions. So come on up if you have any questions. And in the meantime, I'll point out that at the Idaho Freedom Foundation, we do a lot of research into local government, into school districts, counties, cities, into figuring out where it's working and where it's not. We opened a page that looks at our local government accountability, and we're surprised at how many hundreds of complaints we got from individuals in just a few weeks about things that they've seen go on in their local governments. And that includes school districts that are essentially electioneering in schools in mandatory meetings in Twin Falls, holding their teachers captive and then campaigning them for electing the right people to the legislature and to their. But if you have any information, please pass it along to us. Are there any questions for our speakers today? Mr. Allman.
I'm curious, you watch that video at the beginning and you see how radical the NEA is. And I think the IEA is the leadership, seems to be on board based on what they've said. They're very, very far removed from the values of Idaho. How did they get so embedded in our culture to the point where Republicans defend them? And how can we change that?
It's a good question, Brian. Up until about the 1970s, public sector unions and public sector collective bargaining was viewed as essentially unthinkable. We had this private sector framework, the National Labor Relations Act, that the federal government passed in the New Deal era, late 1930s, but that had never been applied in government before. Beginning in, I think it was 1959, the mayor of New York, Robert Wagner Jr., the son, weird world, the son of the senator who spearheaded passage of the National Labor Relations Act in Congress in the 1930s. He, as mayor of New York, his son, as mayor of New York, issued an executive order allowing collective bargaining by city employees. And it was a political deal from the start to get their support against, the political machine in New York at the time. And that opened the floodgates. Then you get into the 1960s, and the labor movement starts reassessing, this hands-off, perspective that it's had for government and public employees. You start seeing among all the anti-war and civil rights protests, you started seeing a lot of labor unrest as well, strikes by police officers and public employees in other contexts. And so all of a sudden, in the midst of that 1960s turmoil, the answer to this unrest from the unions was, well, give us collective bargaining rights, give us the ability to unionize and collectively bargain just like the private sector. And that swept across the country. It became accepted wisdom. You saw most states, and that's actually Idaho's came a little bit later. Teachers got collective bargaining here in the 70s, but that 1960s and the 1970s saw the mass proliferation of collective bargaining across public sector. Well, then the unions became a political force. They became entrenched. They were able to use the rights that they'd been granted in law to accumulate more power and membership and revenue, and then to go back and lobby for more. And so you've seen this play out in states like California and Illinois and New York and my home state of Washington, where this cycle has gone on long enough that it has essentially driven up the cost of government. It has resulted in cannibalizing state services and resulting in a government that is unaccountable, not transparent, not efficient, but also can't be fixed because the unions have consolidated so much power. So in Idaho, unlike many other states, only teachers and firefighters got collective bargaining rights. It did not proliferate as broadly as it did in many other places. And so the influence of government unions here has never been as great as it is in Washington or California and so on. But again, these are political players. They're going to hitch their wagon to whatever side of the political debate they think is most favorable to them. And in Idaho, that means they find and recruit candidates to run as Republicans. They find Republicans who might be aligned with their views electorally. They've just, by virtue of having that ability to collectively bargain in statute and become a political player, made them pick a team. And as soon as they're picking teams and supporting people, then there's going to be a movement of elected officials who are in their camp. And that's just kind of where we're at today.
Thank you, Max. Thank you, Representative Boyle. This question might be for both of you, so let's see give me the answer. So I was having just a conversation with my friend John about possible solutions for the public educations, and he mentioned about probably making an amendment to the Idaho Constitution, the Article 11, Section 1, about not mandating funding for the public education anymore, versus another solution could possibly be more subsidizing a little bit more of a private homeschooling and create more competition. I would like to see from your own perspective, which of these solutions would be best, and if none, what would be the third best solution?
So I have, I may defer here to Representative Boyle a little bit. I have the luxury and the burden of essentially focusing on one issue. And so the Freedom Foundation does not attempt to say what the right answer is to education funding or even structure of public education. Our view, our sole mission is to reform public sector labor unions, again, level the playing field there, and basically give the right of center movement more space to have these conversations about how do you best address public education, how do you best address taxation, or some of these other issues. So we don't have an official policy position on that. I will just note as an observation that one of the reasons unions oppose school choice, teachers unions oppose school choice, is because it does represent generally a threat to their monopoly system. Unions would prefer to have a one-size-fits-all government school system, because for them that's easiest to unionize, that's easiest to politically control, and so they will always, just by virtue of their inherent financial interests, oppose alternatives to public schooling. But what those alternatives are and how the state should permit or regulate them is not something we have detailed positions on. But be happy to turn the mic over to Representative Boyle. She may have better thoughts on that.
Well, you probably all know that last year we finally were able to pass school choice so that some of your money goes back to you so you can decide what's best for your child. And that took such a long time to get that passed. It was just incredible to me. So homeschooling, you know, they now can get funding. You can take your kid to a private school. You can have a tutor. I just think that's only fair. It is your money, after all. It's not the teachers' union's money. You are the taxpayer that the money is taken from for education. As for a constitutional amendment, that is a huge, huge bar. I don't know that Idaho is ready for that yet. As you know, school choice is in the courts, in the Supreme Court, and we'll see what happens there when they finally make a decision here. But hopefully they will decide this was the proper thing and not take that away from parents and kids. Every kid, as you know, does not learn the same. And so many of our public schools are just little cookie cutters. It just doesn't work. So I don't know if that's the answer you were looking for, but that's the reality.
When I was a college professor, whenever there were no questions, it's either because everyone understood perfectly what you had just taught or nobody understood anything. So I'll go with the former on this one. I thank our presenters for their great presentation. Representative Boyle and Max Nelsen, you were awesome. And again, we appreciate you coming to Capitol Clarity. Reminder again, next week, it's at noon again. On the other end of the bottom floor of the Capitol, we'll have signs here just in case you forget. But please spread the word to your friends and everyone. And next week is another banger of an issue. We'll be talking about geoengineering, mosquito abatement, and all those sorts of things. We'll have a few legislators here to talk about what they plan for making Idaho better in that regard. So thank you very much. Have a great day and peace out. Mm-hmm.